A friend of mine who runs a rather successful watch brand called me last month in a state of genuine bafflement. He launched a limited edition, 300 piece edition, and marketed it with the same usual language about exclusivity and rarity and all the rest of it. And the response from his best clients was essentially a collective shrug. It wasn't necessarily hostility, just complete indifference. And he couldn't work out why, because the same approach had worked splendidly 3 years ago with a different release of a different limited edition product. And he kept saying, we did exactly the same thing, which is rather the point, really, isn't it? Because his clients noticed that too. Is that painting crooked? Sorry. And this is where scarcity gets interesting, isn't it? Because it's one of those principles that everyone thinks that they understand. Limited supply increases demand. Marvelous. You can teach that in an afternoon. It's not rocket science. But the mechanism isn't the same for everyone. Think of somebody who already has plenty of everything, because that's not the same as someone who doesn't. And the thing is, most brands never bother to make that distinction. So with a mass market buyer, scarcity works through urgency. There's a genuine worry that if I don't act now, I'm going to miss it. And that's a perfectly real emotional response. It drives enormous amounts of purchasing behavior. And I've got no quarrel with it as a tactic in that context. It's very well researched. There's a lot of behavioral science behind it. But when you're talking to someone affluent, someone who's been buying expensive things for decades, that urgency lever, it's essentially dead. I mean, there are one or two products where it might still be alive, but essentially it's done, it's dust, because they're not worried about missing out, because their entire experience tells them that something else is going to come along, or they'll find whatever it is they want through someone that they know, or frankly, they'll just buy something else. So the scarcity that does work on them, though, is rather different, and it's almost never what brands think it is. With affluent buyers, what they respond to in terms of scarcity is something that confirms something about them. So when a piece is genuinely rare because of how it's made, because of the materials that are finite, or because there's a waiting list that exists for reasons that nobody engineered, that's very important. These engineered waiting lists, most people don't buy into them. Think Patek Philippe, their waiting list is genuine because they don't have the capacity to make any more watches. So the ownership becomes a signal about access and taste. It says something about who you are that money alone can't replicate. And that's identity congruent desire, which is fundamentally a very different thing from loss aversion, which is what scarcity in the mass market would be. Fear of losing out. You're not afraid of losing the opportunity. You're drawn to what having it says about your position within the world. The problem is, here's the fly in the custard. Most brands try to manufacture that second kind of loss aversion scarcity using the tools of the first. So essentially what they try and do is they try and create this congruent identity scarcity using loss aversion. And it doesn't work. So they create artificial drops. They engineer waiting lists. They put these bloody countdown timers on things that are sitting in a warehouse in sufficient quantities to furnish half of Knightsbridge. And the affluent consumer becomes suspiciously good at spotting this. I say suspiciously because it's not always obvious how they know, but they know. And part of it, I suppose, is simply exposure. If you've been sold to your entire adult life at a certain level, you develop rather a refined nose for the mechanics of persuasion. It's called persuasion knowledge. And Friestad and Wright mapped it out rather well, actually. The idea being that as people become more literate about influence tactics, those tactics don't just stop working, they can actively backfire. So affluent consumers tend to have momentarily high persuasion knowledge because they've been on the receiving end of sophisticated selling for years, sometimes decades. And when that nose twitches, when the buyer clocks that the scarcity is performed rather than real, what you get isn't actually indifference per se, it's reactance, which is the psychological term for what happens when someone feels that their autonomy or their agency is being constrained, and they push back against whoever's doing that constraining, which in luxury is the brand or the salesperson or, the company, whatever. And in a luxury context, that's rather devastating because the whole implicit promise is that you're being treated as a discerning individual. And manufactured scarcity says the total and complete opposite. It says, we think this is going to whack on you, which is, when you think about it, quite a ghastly thing to communicate to someone who's spent their entire life cultivating the sense that they're above all of that. So anyway, my friend with the watches eventually worked it out. To his credit, he worked it out on its own. But his best clients had seen the same limited edition language so many times from so many brands. I mean, think about it. Brands are dropping limited editions every bloody month. That the wording is almost becoming meaningless. The brands that actually had scarce product never actually needed to announce it because the constraint was real and you encountered it as a lived experience rather than a marketing message. I mean, can you imagine going to Savile Row or getting a suit made and the tailor saying, "Oh yeah, fine, I can have that for you in 3 days." You'd be like, you what now? 3 days for a suit? No. Why? Because we know that tailors can't produce decent handmade bespoke suits or even made to measure suits in 3 days. It's not possible. So a 2-year wait because, for example, a workshop in the Jura Mountains makes 40 pieces a year tells you something utterly different from a 2-year wait because someone in marketing thought that it would build anticipation. One is real, one is bullshit. And the volume of scarcity messaging is almost always inversely proportional to the reality behind it. The brands that talk most about exclusivity are the ones with the least genuine constraint on supply. Do you genuinely believe that if Hermes wanted to make more Birkins that they couldn't? Of course they could. They're a global operation. But the thing is, the ones that never mention it are the ones where scarcity actually does what it's supposed to do. So the thing I would say is that if you have genuine limited editions, because of real scarcity, great, fantastic. But don't just call something limited or scarce or whatever simply because you think it's going to help you sell them more, because invariably it doesn't. Also, don't use limited edition and scarce with online products. Like, that's really stupid. I've seen it. Oh, only 20 left. It's a PDF. Of course you have more than 20. Anyway, I'm going on a rant. So I'll see you in the next one. Bye.